Beneath the emerald canopy of Southeast Asia, a luxury cruise sails down the crimson Tadesa River, as beautiful as it is unforgiving. Aboard the opulent vessel, the Imperial Pearl, the rich and the reckless gather for what promises to be a lavish escape from the world. But when a woman vanishes without a trace, and a chilling message is scrawled in blood, the cruise of dreams spirals into a voyage of secrets, betrayal, and murder. Everyone has a past. Some have more than one. And someone aboard this ship is hiding more than just a lie. They're hiding a body. As the river twists, so does the truth. And Inspector Dorian Black must unmask a killer before the tide claims another soul. In the end, justice won't come from a courtroom, it'll come from the river. The crimson tides flowed like liquid ruby through the jungles of Southeast Asia, quiet and unbothered by the dramas that clung to its shores. Tourists called it paradise. Locals called it cursed. High above the water, on the private helipad of the Imperial Pearl, Eleanor Duval arrived with the flash of cameras and the hush of whispered awe. She stepped down from the sleek silver chopper in heels that had never touched mud and a dress that shimmered like starlight. Her new husband, Sebastian Vance, followed behind her, sunglasses masking eyes that rarely blinked. They were the golden couple of global headlines. Eleanor, the fashion mogul who turned scandal into power, and Sebastian, the elusive entrepreneur whose past was as pristine as a white sheet too pristine. Passengers aboard the cruise watched from the main deck as the couple boarded. Champagne was served, music played from unseen speakers, and yet there was tension. The kind that lurks just beneath celebration. At the heart of the ship, tucked away in the private bar, Clara Monroe gripped her glass of bourbon with trembling fingers. Her jaw was set tight, but her eyes told the story. The man she once planned to marry was now parading around with Eleanor Duval. She hadn't expected to see them here. She hadn't planned on any except the possibility of closure or revenge. Meanwhile, Inspector Dorian Black sat in a corner booth, dressed like a vacationing banker, reading an old, dog-eared book. He wasn't here for pleasure. An anonymous letter had summoned him to the ship 2 weeks ago, warning of a murder that would unfold during the cruise. It had been unsigned, riddled with vague threats and poetic clues. He didn't believe in fate, but he did believe in patterns, and something about the guest list smelled like kerosene waiting for a spark. Across from the bar, Julian Harker, once a respected investigative journalist, now blogged from a tablet with cracked glass. He watched Eleanor like a hawk from behind his sunglasses, his fingers drumming the table. She'd ruined his career 5 years ago. He'd dug too close to something. Now, maybe, he'd dig again. As the sun dipped low and painted the river in blood-orange light, Dr. Lena Farrow stepped onto the deck, clutching a leather-bound notebook. Her nervous energy contrasted with the tranquil setting. She whispered to herself as she counted heads, then quickly ducked inside. The captain, Arjun Rai, welcomed the passengers with the practiced politeness of a man used to hiding emotion. But beneath his calm exterior was a memory he couldn't shake. Another cruise. Years ago, another body in another cabin. As the Imperial Pearl set off down the river, slicing through water like a scalpel, the mood was electric. Too many secrets, too many ghosts, all trapped together aboard a floating palace. And somewhere, someone was watching, listening, waiting. The first move had already been made, but no one knew it yet. The second morning aboard the Imperial Pearl arrived in mist and gold. Fog rolled off the jungle-lined riverbanks like smoke from a dying fire, curling around the ornate ship as it glided deeper into the unknown. Birds called out from the trees with eerie, echoing cries, as if warning the vessel to turn back. Eleanor Duval sipped her imported espresso on the upper deck, her silk robe catching the breeze like a flag. She scanned the horizon with practiced indifference, but her fingers trembled when she reached for the sugar bowl. Sebastian Vance sat across from her, newspaper folded but unread, pretending not to notice. "I had a nightmare," Eleanor murmured. Sebastian looked up. "You don't dream." She didn't reply. She just stared down into her cup as if something might rise from the dark surface and tell her what to fear. Below deck, in cabin 6B, Clara Monroe pulled a velvet box from her suitcase. Inside was a single engagement ring, vintage platinum, emerald-cut diamond, worn along the edges. She held it up to the light, then slipped it onto her finger once more. It didn't fit like it used to. She placed it carefully on the desk, pulled out her compact mirror, and began applying her makeup with slow, deliberate care. Her eyes betrayed none of the storm inside her. Not yet. A knock on the door startled her. Julian Harker stood outside with a half smile and a full glass of whiskey. "Morning, Clara. Thought you could use something stronger than regret." She didn't invite him in. "You've seen them," he added. "How cozy they look. Do you buy it?" Clara leaned against the doorframe. "Do you ever say anything without recording it?" He chuckled. "I don't need a recorder. I remember everything." She shut the door in his face. In the ship's galley, Dr. Lena Farrow tried to steady her hands as she jotted notes into her journal. It wasn't about the cruise. Not exactly. Her handwriting was frantic, scattered. She circled the name Eleanor 3 times, then underlined it, then crossed it out. She was supposed to be on vacation, but she couldn't stop the feeling that someone had followed her onto this boat. Someone who knew what happened in Hanoi 3 years ago. She flipped the page, revealing a photograph clipped to the next sheet. Eleanor Duval, standing beside a man who wasn't Sebastian, who wasn't smiling. Dr. Farrow snapped the journal shut and shoved it back into her satchel. Up on the bridge, Captain Arjun Rai lit a cigarette with hands that betrayed none of the worry in his chest. He stared out at the river ahead, expression unreadable. His first officer, Singh, approached quietly. "Sir, the route through the Yen forest has been adjusted. Unexpected fog ahead. GPS is unreliable here." Rai didn't turn his head. "Then we trust the river. Should I warn the guests?" Rai shook his head. "Number, let them enjoy their illusions." Singh hesitated. "You seem tense, Captain." Rai took a slow drag from his cigarette. "I sailed this stretch once before. Years ago. Another luxury tour. Beautiful couple. Wealth, charm, secrets." He exhaled smoke through his nose. "By the end of the trip," he said coldly, "only one of them went home." Back in his cabin, Inspector Dorian Black studied the guest manifest again. Every name on the list had checked out. No criminal records, no known aliases, but something was off. He felt it in his bones. He pulled out the anonymous letter again. It was written on cream stationery, the kind that smelled faintly of rose oil. The handwriting was elegant, careful. "One of them will not leave the ship alive. The river will take them. You must be there, Inspector. Watch the currents. Truth is not what it seems." He flipped the page over. The back was blank. He'd held it to UV light. No hidden message. Still, he kept it close beneath his pillow, next to the revolver he hadn't used in over a year. Someone on this boat had written it. He was sure of it. And they were already setting the stage. That night, as the Imperial Pearl slipped silently through the thickening mist, the lights on deck flickered for a single moment. No one noticed, except one figure in a black coat who stood at the stern, watching the water ripple behind the ship. They dropped something small over the edge, a flash of silver that vanished beneath the surface. The river swallowed it whole. Morning broke thick and hot, the humidity turning the Imperial Pearl into a gilded sauna. The fog hadn't lifted. In fact, it clung tighter now, like a shroud over the jungle and river alike. Breakfast was unusually quiet. The white linen buffet on the mid-deck gleamed with silverware and ripe tropical fruit, but the usual buzz of polite conversation was absent. Even the clink of cutlery felt strained. Something hung in the Ira tension, unspoken, yet universally sensed. Clara Monroe arrived fashionably late, in a peach silk dress that clung like a second skin. She scanned the tables, paused briefly when her eyes landed on Sebastian and Eleanor, and continued on. Her heels tapped softly across the deck, like a metronome marking time. She slid into a seat across from Julian Harker, who was already on his second Bloody Mary. "Notice anything strange this morning?" he asked without looking up. Define strange. I knocked on Dr. Farrow's cabin door twice. No answer. Doors locked from the inside. Clara narrowed her eyes. Maybe she's sleeping in. Julian shook his head. Number? I saw her notebook yesterday filled with names. Crossed out numbers. Obsessive. Paranoid. People like that don't just sleep late. Clara exhaled through her nose, a practiced show of boredom. But she couldn't shake the memory of Dr. Farrow glancing at her yesterday with barely concealed recognition. Meanwhile, at the captain's table, Inspector Dorian Black sat beside Captain Rye, both men eating in silence. Dorian leaned in. Do your crew members report in every hour? Rye nodded. They're precise. Can you confirm all guests are accounted for? Rye tilted his head. Why? Call it an itch, Dorian said. And I've learned to scratch when it nags. Down the corridor from the guest cabins, Singh approached the locked door of cabin 4A, where Dr. Lena Farrow had been staying. He knocked firmly. Dr. Farrow? Breakfast has begun. No answer. He knocked again, then tried the handle. Locked. He frowned. Just then, Sebastian Vance appeared from the hallway, arms crossed. Everything all right? He asked. She hasn't come out. Not responding. Sebastian stepped forward and gave the door a harder knock. Lena? Still nothing. Singh looked toward the camera in the hallway, which blinked a slow red. We may need to enter. Sebastian nodded. Do it. Singh returned moments later with a master key. He hesitated, then unlocked the door slowly and pushed it open. The room was empty. Neatly made bed, curtains drawn, suitcase half unpacked. A cup of tea, cold and untouched, sat on the writing desk beside a closed leather satchel. What caught Singh's attention was the open window. The river breeze stirred the curtains slightly. The screen had been popped outward gently, precisely. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no broken glass. Just the steady sound of jungle birds outside and the gurgling hush of water. Captain Rye stood in the cabin minutes later, staring out the open window. Eleanor, Sebastian, Clara, and Julian had gathered nearby, tension rising like steam. Inspector Black examined the room with trained precision. He paused at the desk, noticing a drop of moisture on the wood. He touched it, sniffed it. Salt, sweat, maybe tears. He opened the satchel and pulled out the leather notebook Dr. Farrow always carried. He flipped through it carefully. Notes, names, symbols. A few torn pages. One line jumped out. She saw me on the bridge. She knows what I did. He looked up. She didn't take this notebook with her, he said. Whatever she left for, if she left at all, she didn't plan to go far. Eleanor folded her arms tightly. You think she was taken? Dorian's eyes didn't waver. I think someone wanted it to look like she left on her own. That window was opened deliberately. Too clean, too staged. Clara's voice was low and sharp. Then where is she? No one answered. But out on the water, where the mist still rolled like breath across the surface, something bobbed silently for a moment, half submerged, barely visible, a glimpse of black fabric. Then it was gone. That night, a storm brewed in the distant, self-silent lightning flashing deep in the jungle. And on the bridge, Dorian Black stood alone, flipping through the last page of Lena Farrow's notebook. There, in shaky ink, were 3 words scribbled vertically down the page like a final breath. He's not Sebastian. A restless silence settled over the Imperial Pearl. It wasn't the usual silence of morning fog or tropical calm. This one was tighter, more aware. A silence where every eye shifted just a little more often. Every conversation had lowered a notch. Guests had started locking their cabin doors. Dr. Lena Farrow's disappearance had not yet been declared a crime, but suspicion had already made its rounds like a slow-moving fever. At precisely 9 a.m., Captain Rye called an emergency meeting in the ship's sun lounge. The glass-ceilinged room was usually reserved for reading and drinks, its plush chairs and leafy palms offering comfort and luxury. But now, the air inside was stale with unease. Dorian Black stood at the front, beside Rye, as the passengers filed in one by one. Clara Monroe arrived first. unreadable in a fitted navy jumpsuit, eyes flitting to the river through the glass. Julian Harker came next, scribbling into a small notebook and ignoring everyone. Eleanor and Sebastian entered last. They looked like royalty walking into a courtroom. "Thank you all for coming," Rye began. "Dr. Farrow has not been seen since yesterday. Her cabin was found empty, with a window open to the river." Julian raised a hand lazily. "You think she drowned?" Dorian answered instead. "It's a possibility, but the evidence doesn't fully support that theory." "Which evidence?" Eleanor snapped. "We've seen nothing but fog and paranoia." Dorian held up the notebook. "This belonged to Dr. Farrow. She wrote something before vanishing. A warning." He opened the notebook and turned to the final page. Everyone leaned in. "He's not Sebastian." A beat of silence. Sebastian's brow furrowed, a little too theatrically. "That's absurd," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "She barely knew me." Clara leaned forward. "She wasn't talking about your personality." Julian chuckled. "So, who are you really, Sebastian Vance?" Sebastian stood slowly, smoothing his suit jacket. "You know, I've tolerated your snide remarks since we boarded, but if this is your idea of humor—" "It's not," Dorian cut in. "This is now a criminal investigation, and I'll need to speak to you privately, Mr. Vance, preferably sooner than later." Sebastian looked at Eleanor, who gave him a long, unreadable look. Then he nodded. "Very well." Inside the ship's library, Dorian sat across from Sebastian as the engine hummed softly in the background. He set a manila folder down on the table and opened it. Inside were 3 photographs, Eleanor and Sebastian from their wedding week, a scanned passport belonging to a Sebastian Vance, and a grainy surveillance photo from 6 months prior. Same man, different name. "Your passport was issued in Monaco," Dorian began, "but the embassy has no record of your previous residence there. Before that, you're a ghost. No digital footprint, no family, no schooling." Sebastian leaned back, lips twitching into a small grin. "Is it illegal to live a quiet life?" Dorian tilted his head. "Only if someone else had to die to make it happen." Sebastian said nothing. Dorian pushed the folder forward. The man in this surveillance photo was seen leaving the Bangkok airport under the name Elias Crane. Facial recognition gives a 94% match. Sebastian's smile faltered. "And what exactly do you think I've done, Inspector?" "That's what I intend to find out." Meanwhile, back in her cabin, Eleanor stood at the vanity mirror, removing her earrings with trembling fingers. She stared at her reflection for a long time, then pulled open the drawer and took out a hidden phonia burner, matte black, never used on the cruise before now. She dialed a number. No ring, straight to voicemail. She left a single sentence. "I think Elias broke the rules." That night, the fog lifted slightly, revealing the full moon over the river for the first time in days. But the moonlight didn't bring clarity, it only cast long shadows. Clara sat alone on the deck, a glass of wine in hand. She stared out at the water and whispered to no one, "I know who you are." And in the crew quarters below, Singh found a wet footprint on the floor, outside the laundry room, too large to be a passenger's, too fresh to be ignored. Someone had come aboard from the river, or someone had gone into it and come back. The jungle thinned as the Imperial Pearl passed into a narrower stretch of the Crimson Tides, where the river narrowed and the trees grew closer, as if watching. The mist had retreated for now, but a thick, unnatural silence clung to the banks. It was the kind of quiet that made you feel like something was waiting. Down below deck, in a corridor rarely used by guests, First Officer Singh followed the trail of wet footprints. He hadn't told the captain yet. He wanted to be sure. The prince led him past the staff washroom, down a narrow flight of stairs into the cargo hold. A red utility light blinked above the doorway, faulty, ignored for weeks. The cargo hold wasn't large, but it was cluttered shipping crates, sealed travel trunks, a few pieces of luxury luggage that hadn't been claimed. It smelled of mildew and oil. Singh moved carefully, stepping over ropes and crates, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Then he saw it. A small wooden crate in the far corner, unmarked, sealed with thick rope. Except the rope was slashed, frayed at the ends like it had been cut in haste. Singh approached slowly, flashlight flickering. The lid of the crate was slightly ajar. He reached for it with gloved hands and pulled it open. What he saw made him stumble back, heart thundering. Inside was a woman's scarf, soaked and torn, wrapped around something heavy and dark. He reached in and uncovered a ceremonial dagger, its hilt engraved with serpent-like symbols. And beneath that, he found a photo of Eleanor Duval, standing beside Dr. Lena Farrow, and both of them were smiling. Upstairs, Eleanor sat in her cabin, running her fingers through her hair, her mind spiraling. She hadn't expected Lena to come aboard. That had never been part of the plan. Worse, Lena recognized her. Eleanor had seen it in her eyes. And now Lena was gone. She opened the burner phone again and checked for messages. Nothing. Her fingers hovered over the delete button. But before she could press it, the door burst open. Dorian Black entered, flanked by Captain Rye. Eleanor stood. "What is this?" "We need to talk," Dorian said calmly, "about your connection to Dr. Farrow and to Elias Crane." Her pulse quickened. "Who?" "Sebastian," Dorian said, stepping closer. "Elias Crane is a convicted identity thief from Amsterdam. He vanished 3 years ago after a financial scandal tied to the disappearance of 2 women. One of them was a psychiatrist named Eliza Farron." Eleanor's face remained still, but her eyes twitched barely. "Lena Farrow," Dorian added, "wasn't her real name either." He laid the photo down on the table, the one Singh had just found. Eleanor sat down slowly. "She came on board to expose him," Dorian said. "But why did you?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "Because I was trying to protect him." She looked up. "Until I realized I wasn't the only one." That night, Julian Harker crept down into the cargo hold. His curiosity had turned into obsession. He'd seen Singh leave with the photo and the dagger, his face pale. Whatever he found, Julian needed to see it for himself. But when he reached the crate, it was empty. The dagger was gone. The scarf was gone. The photo was gone. All that remained was a trail of blood, smeared across the floor and leading toward the cold storage unit. Julian reached out, slowly, cautiously. He opened the freezer door, and inside, wrapped in a tarp, was a body. Dr. Lena Farrow, mouth open in silent scream, eyes frozen in horror. Screams echoed through the metal halls of the lower deck. By the time Captain Rye and Inspector Dorian Black reached the cargo hold, Julian Harker was on the floor, pale and shaking, his hands streaked with frost and blood. He couldn't speak. He only pointed toward the open freezer. Dorian stepped forward, his face grim. He'd seen death before more than he cared to count, but something about this was different. Cold, methodical, not an act of rage, but of design. Dr. Lena Farrow's body lay neatly wrapped in the tarp, as though someone had planned the burial with precision. The scarf Singh had found earlier was tied around her mouth like a gag, stained dark. Her hands were bound behind her back. No signs of external trauma. A post-mortem freezer someone had wanted the body to disappear or be preserved. "Close it," Rye muttered, jaw clenched. "Seal the freezer." "Not yet," Dorian replied. "We need everything, every detail." Above deck, word spread fast. By noon, the Imperial Pearl was no longer a luxury escape. It was a floating prison. Panic crept into every conversation, no matter how hushed. The guests began gathering in groups, watching each other warily, drinking more heavily, whispering when backs were turned. Clara Monroe stood at the edge of the observation deck, staring at the jungle creeping by. Her fingers traced the rail absently. Eleanor approached quietly. "She's dead," she said. Clara nodded. "She came here because of Sebastian, didn't she?" Eleanor asked. Clara turned. "You tell me. You married him." Eleanor's expression hardened. You dated him. Clara stepped in closer. Number, I knew him. You still don't. Later that evening, Dorian gathered the passengers in the Sun Lounge once again. This time, no one dressed for the occasion. They looked drained, haunted. The jungle outside was silent, save for the occasional cry of a bird that sounded too human. Dorian paced slowly in front of them. Dr. Farrow was murdered. Her body was hidden in the freezer on the lower deck. She was bound and gagged. Cause of death appears to be asphyxiation. Gasps, whispers. Julian looked sick. We are currently in contact with River Patrol, Dorian continued. But until we reach the next port, this ship remains isolated. That means the killer is still among us. A heavy silence followed. Someone here went to great lengths to make Lena Farrow disappear. She was not who she claimed to be, but neither is Sebastian Vance. Sebastian, seated at the back with Eleanor, didn't flinch, but his hand slowly moved across his knee. Protective, nervous, or calculating. I've found records linking him to a man named Elias Crane, Dorian continued. A man with a history of fraud, false identities, and possible involvement in 2 unsolved disappearances. Dr. Farrow may have uncovered the truth. That's why she died. Sebastian stood slowly, voice calm but sharp. This is slander. No, Dorian replied. This is motive. Julian jumped in. So what now? We just wait while someone else gets murdered in their sleep? Captain Rye raised his voice for the first time. All passengers will be restricted to public areas after sunset. No one moves alone. Crew will monitor halls, and we will search every cabin starting now. Sebastian scoffed. Including ours? Dorian turned to him. Especially yours. As the passengers scattered, Eleanor caught Dorian by the arm. You're wrong, she said. About him. Dorian looked at her. Then tell me who he is. She hesitated. And then, quietly, he saved my life 3 years ago. By becoming someone else? No, she whispered. By helping me become someone else. That night, Singh and a security officer searched Sebastian and Eleanor's cabin. They found a false-bottomed suitcase with documents in the name Elias Crane. A box of old photos, Sebastian, with different women, different cities, always smiling, always disappearing. A worn passport, with Clara Monroe's picture inside, under a different name. Singh exchanged a glance with the officer. It seemed everyone on this ship had a past they weren't ready to explain. Meanwhile, alone in the crew's storage room, Julian Harker opened his laptop, connected to the ship's weak signal, and uploaded a file titled Death on the River, the True Identity of Sebastian Vance. He clicked send. But before the upload could finish, the power cut out. Total darkness. Then a voice whispered behind him. You shouldn't have done that. The emergency lights buzzed to life seconds after the main power cut out cold, red, and humming with dread. A siren trilled once, then stopped. Footsteps echoed down the empty hallways of the Imperial Pearl as passengers emerged from their cabins like ghostsolent, pale, wide-eyed. The fog had returned outside, thicker than ever, curling against the windows like breath against glass. Captain Rye stormed into the control room, Singh on his heels. Sabotage? Rye demanded. Possible, Singh said, flipping open the circuit panel. But whoever did it knew exactly what to pull. This wasn't a simple short. As Singh worked to restore power, Dorian Black moved swiftly through the passenger deck, flashlight in hand. The darkness made the ship feel unfamiliar, like it had shapeshifted into something predatory. He reached the communications room. The door was ajar. Inside, Julian Harker's laptop sat on the desk still open. The screen glowed faintly. Upload failed. Connection lost. A USB drive was missing from the port. But Julian was gone. The chair lay overturned. On the floor was a single smudge of blood. Fresh. A drag mark. Faint but unmistakable, leading toward the hatch to the service corridor. Dorian followed it. 30 minutes later, power returned. The ship shuddered as systems rebooted. Lights blinked on, fans whirred back to life. But there was no sign of Julian. The passengers had gathered again this time. They demanded answers. "He's not just missing," Dorian announced. "He's been taken." Clara pressed her hand to her mouth. Eleanor sat very still. Sebastian remained standing, arms folded. "What did he find?" Clara asked. "What was he uploading?" Dorian looked at her. "Something about Sebastian. Something he thought the world should see." Rye cut in. "We searched the network logs. There was an attempt to access the ship's restricted comm system just before the power went out. The signal was rerouted, cut off from the inside." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "And I'm still your only suspect?" Dorian stepped closer. "You're not the only one. Not anymore." He turned toward Clara. "You were carrying a false passport." Clara didn't blink. "I didn't kill anyone." Dorian raised an eyebrow. "Then who are you?" Clara took a slow breath, then exhaled. "My real name is Isabel Crane," she said, "and I'm Elias Crane's sister." Gasps rippled through the room. "He vanished 3 years ago after his fiancée drowned in the Black Sea. They said he was guilty, that he ran. I came here to find the truth." She looked at Eleanor. "And I think you helped him disappear." Eleanor's face went white. "I didn't know who he was back then," she whispered. "He was going by a different name. He told me he'd lost everything. I believed him. He saved me from a life I couldn't escape. Until he built another lie," Clara said coldly. Later that night, Captain Rye called Dorian to the bridge. "We found something," he said, his face pale. "On the radar system recently restored there was a blip. A small boat, unregistered, matching no patrol signature, had been detected approaching the Imperial Pearl during the power outage. But it had vanished before sunrise. Left no trace." Rye zoomed in on the map. It came close enough to board. No distress signal, no ID. Dorian stared at the screen. "What if the killer didn't come with us?" he murmured. "What if they joined us along the way?" Rye frowned. "That would mean this was coordinated." Dorian nodded grimly. "Exactly." Meanwhile, in the ship's lower hull, deep beneath the cabins, a faint tapping echoed from inside a storage locker. Soft, weak, but unmistakably human. Someone was alive down there. Barely. It was just past 2 a.m. when the tapping was heard again. Singh, making his rounds below deck, paused. It was faint, like nails against metal, irregular, weak. He followed it, down past the backup generators and storage lockers, to a maintenance room no passenger would ever see. The noise stopped the moment he opened the door. But something was off. A large supply cabinet was slightly ajar, sealed from the outside with heavy-duty tape freshly applied. Singh pulled the tape free, pried the doors open, and Julian Harker collapsed into his arms. His face was pale, blood dried at the corner of his mouth. His wrists bore red marks from bindings. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "I saw them, wearing black, not crew." He passed out before he could say more. By sunrise, chaos had replaced paranoia. Word of Julian's recovery spread fast, but so did fear. He was alive, but unconscious, and no one knew how long he'd been buried down there or what exactly he had seen. And then there was the black-clad figure, not crew, not guest, a ghost. It meant one thing: an outsider had boarded the ship. But how and why? Dorian Black didn't sleep. He stood by the railing of the main deck, watching the rising sun burn through the fog. Something wasn't adding up. 3 people had gone missing. 2 were found. 1 was still out there, possibly the killer, and maybe someone was helping them from within. He needed to push harder. Interrogation room, 10 a.m. Clara Isabel Crane sat, across from Dorian in a narrow room off the bridge. Her wrists were red from anxiety, her voice sharper than before. "I didn't know Eleanor was involved. I followed Sebastian Eliasher. I wanted to see if the rumors were true." "What rumors?" "That he seduced women, drained their finances, disappeared." My brother disappeared too after his fiancée was found dead. They pinned it on him. I never believed it. And now? Clara hesitated. Now I think someone's hunting all of us. Meanwhile, Eleanor stood in her cabin, staring at herself in the mirror. She looked older now, the lines around her mouth, the fear behind her eyes. She opened the safe behind the vanity. Inside were two things, a gun and a silver necklace with a wedding ring attached to it. She hadn't worn it since they left Bangkok. Not because she'd stopped loving Sebastian, but because she'd started to doubt him. Later that afternoon, Captain Rai summoned the crew for a security sweep. Every storage room, cabin, and corridor would be searched. The passengers were ordered to remain in the public areas. The air was electric, tense. And then, Dorian found it. Inside a ventilation shaft near the stern of the ship wedged between two panel swaths, a waterproof satchel. Inside, a black wetsuit, soaking wet, a pair of tactical gloves, and a burner phone. The phone was locked, but the message preview on the home screen was chilling. Phase 2 begins at sundown. Kill the witness. Dorian called a lockdown. Passengers were furious, Clara most of all. She confronted Sebastian in front of the others. You vanished for a year. You lied about who you were. You let my brother take the fall. Tell the truth. Sebastian didn't flinch. I tried to disappear, he said coldly, but someone didn't want me to. Someone made sure I ended up on this boat with all of you. He looked around. I'm not the killer, he said, but someone here knows who is. That night, the ship's lights dimmed again just for a second. Not a full outage, just enough. A warning. Dorian stood near the upper deck, revolver tucked under his coat. Rai was beside him, hand resting on the radio. We've got a mole, Dorian said. Someone helping whoever came aboard. Who do you think it is? I don't know, Dorian replied, but they're going to kill again. He turned to face the dark river. They're not done yet. The sun sank red behind the treetops, setting the crimson tides aglow like molten copper. But on the Imperial Pearl, the heat had turned claustrophobic sweaty, tense, and thick with dread. The ship had slowed unexpectedly. Captain Rai stood on the bridge, staring at the controls. We've lost rudder control, Singh reported. Manual overrides failing. Something's jamming it. Could it be sabotage? Rai asked, though he already knew the answer. Singh nodded grimly. We're drifting. The ship veered slightly off course, sliding closer to the jungle-lined banks, toward the wild, overgrown stretch of the river, where signal towers failed and rescue would take days. Down on the observation deck, Eleanor paced like a caged animal. The passengers were restless. Some had begun whispering about abandoning ship using one of the lifeboats. Clara Isabel watched Sebastian from across the lounge. He was calm, too calm. She stepped toward him. Say something. Anything. He looked at her. What would you believe? That you didn't kill those women. Sebastian's jaw clenched. I didn't. Then tell me the truth about Elias Crane. He hesitated. And then, for the first time, he spoke like a man shedding a mask. My name was Elias Crane, he said. I wasn't a killer. I was a grifter, a high-end con artist. Women mostly. Rich. Lonely. I never hurt them. I just left with their money. He swallowed. But one of them, Sophia Arendt, she figured me out. Threatened to expose me. Said she'd ruin me. The next day, she drowned during a yacht trip. Did you kill her? Clara whispered. No, Sebastian said. But someone wanted it to look like I did. Eleanor approached slowly, eyes narrowed. You never told me about Sophia. I wanted to leave it behind, until Lena showed up. And now someone's making sure that past never dies. Meanwhile, in the lower decks, Singh radioed in with a chilling discovery. One of the lifeboats was missing. Lowered recently, rope still wet. Someone had tried to escape. But not far from where it would have hit the water tied to the railing was a single black boot, and a trail of blood leading down the port side of the ship. The passengers gathered again. Everyone was on edge now. No more secrets. No more silence. "We have a killer among us," Dorian said, facing them all. "And now they've tried to flee or fake their death." Julian Harker had still not woken up. His breathing was shallow. His lips cracked. Whatever he had seen, whoever attacked him had made sure he'd stay silent. Dorian held up a blood-stained glove found near the lifeboat. "It doesn't belong to Sebastian. It doesn't belong to any crew." He paused. "It belongs to someone none of us suspected." He turned and looked directly at Captain Rye. A beat of silence, then gasps. Rye's face didn't move. "I've captained this ship for 15 years, he said slowly, "and I've seen what this river can do." "You also cleared every manifest," Dorian said, "and you were the only one who could have disabled the rudder control without alerting the crew." Rye stared at him. "You're reaching." "Maybe," Dorian said, "but Lena Farrow was smuggled onto this ship without documentation, and you never flagged it." Rye's jaw twitched. Eleanor stepped forward. She wasn't the only one. Everyone turned. "There's another person aboard this ship," she said. "Someone none of us know. I saw them during the first night, in the reflection of the glass." Clara paled. "You saw the killer?" "I saw someone watching us," Eleanor whispered. "But when I turned, they were gone." Just then, the power flickered again. Then went out. Again. Screams echoed from the rear deck. Dorian drew his gun. Rye reached for the emergency light switch. The ship groaned as it slowed even more, caught in an eddy. And then came the sound of shattering glass. The solarium had been smashed. Someone had broken in or broken out. Dorian sprinted toward it. Inside, beneath the glass ceiling now riddled with cracks, they found a blood trail leading to the starboard side, and a body slumped against the wall, face down, hair soaked with blood. Dorian turned the body over. Clara. The solarium was deathly quiet. The broken glass crunched beneath Dorian Black's shoes as he knelt beside Clara Isabel, blood trickling down from a gash on her forehead. Her pulse fluttered under his fingers. Alive. Barely. "She's breathing," Dorian called out as Captain Rye and Singh arrived with a medical kit. "Get the medic, now." Rye knelt beside him, expression unreadable. Who would do this? Dorian didn't answer. His eyes weren't on Clara, they were on the message scrawled across the cracked glass of the solarium's curved ceiling. One lie left. The words were written in something dark, thick, red. Blood. In the medical bay, Clara lay unconscious, hooked to an IV, her head bandaged. Dorian stood nearby with Eleanor and Sebastian, the air between them taut like wire. "What does it mean?" Eleanor asked quietly. Dorian didn't look away from Clara. "It means the killer thinks we're close. Too close." "To what?" Sebastian muttered. "They've already killed Lena, attacked Julian, tried to fake their own death. What more is there?" Dorian slowly turned. One lie left, one identity still hidden. He stared at Sebastian. "Tell me about Sophia Arendt, the woman who drowned." Sebastian didn't flinch. "I told you everything I know." "No, you didn't," Dorian replied, "because I found her obituary." He reached into his coat and pulled out a water-damaged newspaper clipping, laminated and folded. "Sophia Arendt," Dorian said. "Real name, Sophia Crane. Your fiancée was Clara's twin sister." Eleanor gasped. Sebastian's breath caught. "Number, that's not possible." "Oh, it's very possible," Dorian said. "And it's the piece none of us saw coming." That evening, as the ship floated deeper into an uncharted fork of the river, the fog thickened again, thicker than ever, swallowing the jungle whole. Captain Rye gathered the senior crew. "We're being steered somewhere," he said. "This stretch isn't on any chart. Someone tampered with our nav system." "You think the killer's leading us into a trap?" Singh asked. "I think they already have," Rye said grimly. Meanwhile, Dorian sat alone in his cabin, reviewing everything. The photos, the manifest, the timeline. 3 things didn't add up. How Lena had boarded without papers. how Julian had survived 2 days locked in cold storage, and why Clara had lied about her sister's death being a suicide when the coroner listed blunt force trauma. Then came the knock. Singh entered, breathless, holding a small plastic bag. "We found this in Clara's bag," he said. Inside was a burner phone, new, unsynced. Singh continued. "She never used it except for one draft message." Dorian opened it. "He thinks I'm after him. He's wrong. I'm after the one who made her disappear." A chill rippled down his spine. Clara hadn't been hunting Sebastian. She'd been hunting someone else. That night, Clara stirred in her bed. Her eyes fluttered open. Dorian sat beside her. "Clara," he said softly, "you have to tell me, who were you really after?" She blinked. Her lips cracked, voice barely audible. "Eleanor." Elsewhere, on the bridge, Captain Rye stood alone, staring out into the mist, hands gripping the railing. He didn't hear Singh approach until it was too late. A sharp crack echoed across the steel deck. Rye dropped to his knees, blood spreading across his collar. Singh stepped back, holding a wrench slick with crimson. He leaned down and whispered, "Time to finish what we started." The alarm rang at 3:42 a.m. Captain Arjun Rai was dead. The crew found his body slumped on the bridge deck, throat crushed, eyes wide with shock. There was no weapon nearby, just blood on the railing, and one boot print deep, clean, and facing away from the wheel. Inspector Dorian Black arrived within minutes, Singh at his side. "We found him like this," Singh said calmly, staring down at the corpse. No signs of a struggle. But Dorian had seen plenty of death. This wasn't panic. This was controlled, surgical, and something about Singh's tone, too steady, too practiced. Dorian returned to Clara's side in the medical bay. She was awake now, pale but alert, staring at the ceiling like it held the truth. "You said Eleanor made your sister disappear," Dorian said. "Start from the beginning." Clara closed her eyes for a moment. "She wasn't just my sister. She was my twin, Sophia. She met Elias Crane during a gala in Budapest. He swept her off her feet, promised her the world." "I know this story," Dorian said. "She drowned." "No," Clara whispered. "That's what Eleanor wanted the world to believe." Dorian froze. "What do you mean?" Clara's eyes focused, her voice steadier. "Eleanor Duval knew exactly who Elias was. She was already in the picture before Sophia drowned. She and Elias were having an affair." Dorian frowned. "Eleanor denies knowing him before they met in Monaco." "She's lying," Clara said. "She manipulated Sophia, stole her designs, sabotaged her business, and then the yacht accident." "Accident?" Clara shook her head. "My sister was terrified of water. She wouldn't have gone on a boat alone. The night before she died, she called me, said someone was following her, watching her. She was going to tell the press everything." She stared into Dorian's eyes. Then she disappeared. Eleanor launched her fashion empire weeks later with Sophia's sketches. Sebastian went into hiding, and no one ever mentioned her again. Elsewhere, Eleanor stood alone in the suite, staring out into the fog. She knew the walls were closing in. She could feel them. The last time she'd felt like this was on that cursed yacht in the Black Sea. The waves slamming against the hull, the sound of screaming that didn't come from her. She turned and froze. Singh stood in the doorway. He was smiling, not politely, predatorially. "I think it's time you and I had a talk," he said. Dorian stormed into the communications room, fresh suspicion boiling inside him. Singh, always calm, always one step ahead. Too calm. He called up the ship's logs. Singh had been on every private deck during each incident. He had access to the cameras, the generator systems, even the override for the lifeboat release. And then Dorian found it. Security footage, deleted but recoverable. He played it. There, in black and white, was Singh lowering the lifeboat, alone. No panic, no rush, just methodical movement. And he wasn't escaping. He was sending something out onto the river, A supply crate waited. He was disposing of evidence. In Eleanor's suite, Singh stepped closer. You knew who he was. You knew what he'd done. Eleanor backed away slowly. I tried to stop it. You profited from it. You don't know the full story. I don't care, Singh said coldly. Your empire was built on lies, on stolen lives. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a syringe. Eleanor's eyes widened. Your chapter ends now. But the door burst open. Dorian, gun drawn. Step away from her. Singh's eyes narrowed. She's not innocent. I know, Dorian said, but neither are you. Eleanor slumped into the corner as Singh lunged. The syringe hit the floor. A gunshot echoed through the suite. Singh collapsed, grabbing his shoulder, howling in pain. Dorian kicked the syringe away and stood over him. You killed Rai, he said. I killed for Rai, Singh spat, blood on his teeth. We were both cleaning up a mess. He just got weak. Later, under sedation and handcuffs, Singh was moved to the brig. But the damage was done. Captain dead, power failing, river drifting, and a new truth had emerged. Singh wasn't working alone. He was taking orders from someone who knew exactly what was on this ship and what needed to be silenced. That night, Clara visited Eleanor's suite. Eleanor looked up from her chair, bandaged and quiet. Clara dropped a torn envelope on the table. Inside, Sophia's original will, dated a week before her death. Everything had been left to Clara. And yet, Eleanor had inherited it all. You forged her death certificate, Clara said softly. Didn't you? Eleanor's eyes didn't deny it. They just filled with tears. You don't understand, she whispered. She wasn't supposed to die. The rain hit the river like needles the next morning. The storm had arrived in full thick sheets of wind and water slamming the deck, rocking the Imperial Pearl as it drifted further into the uncharted fork of the crimson tides. The guests had stopped asking when they'd reach land. Now they just wanted to survive. In the solarium now patched and sealed, Clara and Dorian sat across from Eleanor, her face pale, her hands trembling around a glass of untouched tea. I'm ready, she said softly. Clara nodded once. Tell me what happened to Sophia. Eleanor stared into the storm beyond the glass. It started with Elias, she whispered. He was magnetic, dangerous, and he knew it. He found women like me and like Sophia, ones who had something to lose. He used charm like a knife. She loved him, Clara said. I did too, Eleanor whispered, but I was second, always second, until the yacht. She swallowed hard. We were anchored off the coast, just the three of us. Sophia had found out about us. She confronted me. I told her I didn't mean to fall in love with him, that I'd leave. Clara's eyes welled. But she never came home. Eleanor's voice cracked. She was drunk, angry. She stormed up to the deck. I followed her. She hit me. I hit her back. A long silence. She tripped, Eleanor whispered. She hit her head on the railing. Two didn't mean to. But you left her there, Clara said. I panicked, Eleanor sobbed. She was barely breathing. Elias said we had to protect ourselves, that no one would believe us. So he dragged her body below deck, said we'd dump it offshore. I wanted to go to the police. You didn't, Dorian said. Eleanor shook her head. He said if I went down, he would too, and I believed him. So I helped him make it look like an accident. Clara stood up. And then you took her name, her work, her future. I loved her, Eleanor cried. No, Clara said. You buried her. Hours later, Dorian stood on the bridge, rain slashing the windows. Singh remained sedated, handcuffed in a locked supply closet. The storm had made helicopter extraction impossible. They were alone. But Dorian had one more move to play. He gathered the passengers and remaining crew in the ballroom, once elegant, now stripped of all pretense. The lights flickered above. Thunder rolled outside. Dorian stepped to the center of the room. It ends tonight, he said. Singh didn't act alone. He was being directed by someone who wanted Clara, Eleanor, and Sebastian all in one place. Someone who's been orchestrating this long before the cruise. He turned toward Eleanor. You weren't the target. Then to Clara. You weren't either. Then his eyes met Sebastian's and Emaine. You were. Julian Harker had finally regained consciousness. Pale, weak, but alive. And with him, Dorian had found the final clue. Julian had recorded part of his own attack. He played the audio. Static. Footsteps. The sound of the door opening. A voice. Calm. Deep. You always dig too deep, Harker. Then another sound softer. Mechanical. A voice distortion filter. But Dorian had cleaned the audio. Scrubbed the distortion. And when he pressed play again, the voice was crystal clear. We can't afford another mess, Sebastian. Clara's jaw dropped. It wasn't Singh. It wasn't Elias Crane. It was Captain Arjun Rai. Dead men don't plan murders. Unless they're not dead. Suddenly, the ballroom lights went out. A scream. Gunshots in the dark. Dorian shouted, "Get down!" Panic erupted. Rain slammed the windows. The ship tilted violently as a blast rocked the hull from below. In the chaos, a figure darted from the back of the ballroom wearing a rain-soaked captain's coat, face bloodied but unmistakable. Rai, alive, armed, and running. Dorian gave chase, gun drawn, heart hammering. Down the corridor, past the cabins, into the fog-drenched engine room. There, through the steam and shadows, Rai stood half-mad, bleeding, drenched, smiling like the devil himself. I gave you everything, Rai hissed. Order, control, and they threw it all away. You staged your own death, Dorian said. Let Singh take the fall. I made Elias, protected him, hid him, and when he wanted out, I cleaned up his mess. Sophia, Lena, even the mechanic who helped fake his passport. All of them. Why? Dorian shouted. Because I built this, Rai growled, and I wasn't going to let them tear it down. He raised his pistol, but Dorian fired first. One shot. Rai dropped to his knees, then fell backward into the steam, vanishing like a ghost. Dawn broke like a bruised promise. The storm had passed, but the Imperial Pearl drifted slowly through a glassy stretch of river calm and unsettling. Jungle birds returned to the trees, singing again, unaware of the blood and lies that lingered on the decks below. Rai was gone. Shot. His body had vanished into the engine room mist, slipping into a lower exhaust chute that emptied into the river. There would be no grave. No trial. Only silence. Dorian Black stood at the stern, coat drenched, hands shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline. It was over or should have been. But he knew better. Villains didn't work alone, and Rai wasn't the only mind behind this game. He turned as Singh, bruised and cuffed, was escorted to the infirmary. Julian Harker was stable now, recovering slowly. Clara sat at his bedside, hands still trembling, holding a small silver locket that had belonged to her sister. Eleanor remained isolated in her cabin. Dorian hadn't arrested her. Not yet. But the weight of truth had finally found her. In the ship's command room, Dorian gathered Clara, Julian, and Eleanor what was left of the tangled triangle of past and present. I know it wasn't just Rai, he said. He had help from someone on land, someone who knew who would be on this cruise, who put this together, who funded it. He pulled up the booking records weeks before the cruise even set sail. An anonymous reservation had been made using a shell company tied to Arendt Holdings. Clara froze. That's my family's estate, but it was frozen after Sophia's death. Exactly, Dorian said. Frozen by the court but accessed 2 months ago using your sister's credentials. Julian blinked. You mean? She's dead, Clara said. Dorian shook his head. That's the lie Rai told. But there was never a confirmed ID. No autopsy, no dental match. Just a body they buried at sea. A closed casket. No witnesses but Rai and Elias. Silence. Eleanor sat down slowly. You think Sophia's alive? I think someone used her name to finance this cruise, Dorian said. And I think they wanted all three of you in the same place, to finish what they started. Later that day, Dorian returned to Eleanor's suite, where she sat alone, pale as the curtains, watching the river through a cracked window. She's alive, isn't she? He asked softly. Eleanor didn't answer. She just held out a phone. It was the same burner she'd been hiding for days. On its screen was a single message, unopened, timestamped the night before the cruise set sail. You took everything from me. Now I'll show you what it feels like to lose everything. See you aboard. S.A. Sophia Arendt. Alive. Watching. Hunting. Back in her cabin, Clara unlocked her sister's locket. Inside was a folded piece of paper, stained with age. A message. If something happens to me, it's not an accident. Tell Eleanor she's next. Clara stared out the porthole, barely breathing. The game wasn't over. It had only just changed players. The river widened as the Imperial Pearl emerged from the jungle's grasp, its hull battered and morale fractured. Ahead, on the southern bend of the Crimson Tides, a small private dock came into Vioa rusted platform beside an abandoned outpost. No navy, no authorities. Just a single black vehicle parked in the shadows. Dorian Black stood at the bow, watching the dock grow closer, his gut twisting. This wasn't where they were supposed to land. This wasn't in the navigation plan. Someone had rerouted them. The passengers gathered reluctantly on the main deck, silent and wary. Clara stayed close to Julian, who had insisted on standing despite his injuries. Eleanor stood apart, her eyes scanning the trees. Sebastian Elias lingered near the railing, one hand resting on a case that had never been opened during the trip. Dorian hadn't pushed him about it. Not yet. As the gangplank lowered, no one moved to disembark. Then a figure appeared. A woman in a pale blue suit, veiled by a wide-brimmed hat. She stepped onto the dock and waited. The air grew still. Dorian took a step forward. Who is that? Eleanor's face went white. Clara whispered, "It can't be." But it was. Sophia Arendt. She removed the hat slowly. Same eyes as Clara. Same mouth. But sharper, colder. A different woman altogether. "I told you I'd come," Sophia said, stepping up the gangplank, voice calm. "You left me in the dark long enough." Eleanor's voice cracked. "We buried you." "No," Sophia said. "You buried a lie. You and Elias." She turned to Sebastian. He didn't speak. "I survived," she said. "Rai pulled me from the water, told me everything, that you planned to run with Eleanor, that you wanted my name, my work. You hit your head," Eleanor whispered. "You weren't the same." "I wasn't yours to destroy," Sophia snapped. Dorian stepped between them. "You staged all of this?" Sophia looked at him. "I arranged the cruise manifest, sent the letter to you, gave Rai a purpose. But when he lost control, I changed the plan." "You killed Lena?" Dorian asked. "No," Sophia said. "That was Rai. He panicked when she recognized me boarding in disguise. Thought she'd ruin everything. I only wanted truth. I wanted them to face what they did." "But people died," Clara said. "You became what they were." Sophia stepped closer to her sister. "And you followed me onto this ship, using Mother's name, looking for vengeance. You were never innocent, Clara." Tears burned in Clara's eyes. "I just wanted to bring you peace." "You brought me witnesses," Sophia said flatly. Dorian raised his voice. "This ends now." Sophia smiled. "It already ended. I have everything I need. Recorded confessions, evidence, and no jurisdiction out here. You can't arrest me on international waters." Sebastian moved for his case. Dorian reacted quickly, drawing his weapon. "Don't!" But Sebastian simply opened it and pulled out a stack of cash, bound and rubber sealed. He walked toward Sophia, placed it at her feet. "No more running," he said. Sophia looked at it. You think this buys redemption? No, he said. It's the last thing I stole. I don't want it anymore. She stared at him, then back at Eleanor. You get to live with what you did, she said coldly. She turned to Clara. You're the only one I trust to tell the truth. You were always the heart. Clara shook her head. You're not the sister I remember. Sophia didn't reply. She stepped back down the gangplank toward the black vehicle. And without another word, she was gone. That night, the ship remained docked. The silence aboard was heavier than ever. Sophia had left, but her presence clung to every corner like perfume and ash. Dorian made one final entry in his case log. Justice doesn't always arrive with handcuffs. Sometimes, it walks away in heels and takes every soul with it. 3 days later, the Imperial Pearl docked at a major port in southern Vietnam. Coast Guard boats greeted the ship in full force sirens, floodlights, questions. The news had broken worldwide before anyone stepped off the gangplank. Murder on the Crimson Tides flashed across international headlines, accompanied by blurry photos of the guests who had become suspects and survivors. Dorian Black stood beside the authorities as interviews were conducted. Crew were separated from passengers, statements recorded, evidence boxed and tagged. Still, no body had been recovered from the river. Captain Rai, presumed dead again, was officially listed as deceased. Singh was taken into custody, sedated, silent, and shackled. His eyes remained glassy, hollow. Sophia Arendt had vanished again. No record of her departure, no trace of the black vehicle, nothing but that blue suit etched in their memories, and the voice that still echoed in Dorian's mind. Clara sat on a bench beneath the customs terminal, the locket still around her neck. Her face was calm, but her hands were cold. She's gone, she whispered. Again. Dorian nodded beside her. But this time, she left you something. He handed her a flash drive, recovered from the ship's comm server. Inside, recordings, journals, blueprints of her revenge. Everything Sophia had compiled. Her voice is soft, intelligent, furious, outlining years of manipulation, betrayal, and control. She wanted you to choose, Dorian said. Expose it, or let it die with her. Clara stared at the drive. Would it bring justice? She asked. Dorian didn't answer. Eleanor Duval was escorted off the ship under a wave of flashing cameras. She wore sunglasses and silence like armor. Her legal team flanked her. No formal charges, no arrest yet. She turned back once before stepping into a black SUV. And for a second, she looked like a child again. Lost, empty. Then the door closed. Julian Harker sold his story within the hour. Trapped on a river of lies. It trended worldwide. He didn't lie, but he didn't tell everything either. Sebastian Vansilius Grenadis appeared. Again. There was no arrest, no warrant, only a sealed manila envelope left for Dorian. Inside, a note. We all play our part. Mine ends here. I won't steal another day. And beneath it, a set of new passports. Unused. Unmarked. He had left the game. Maybe. At sunset, Dorian stood once more on the empty deck of the Imperial Pearl. Cleanup crews had cleared away bloodstains. Broken glass had been replaced. But the ship felt hollow, like a stage after the last act quiet, but still echoing the final lines. He took a deep breath, his thoughts heavy. Then Singh's voice came back to him, from days earlier. We were all just pawns in her story. He hadn't been wrong. That night, as Dorian packed his things, his phone buzzed. A private number. He answered. A familiar voice. Inspector Black, Sophia said. Do you think you made the right choice? Letting them all walk away? I didn't let them, he said. They ran. She paused. Then maybe next time you'll chase harder. The line went dead. Dorian sat in silence for a long time, then finally whispered to no one. There's always a next time.